October 1947. I was the oldest of three daughters. I lived there until I was married at age 20 and moved out to Long Island. I'm the mother of 4 children and 7 grandchildren. Growing up in Brooklyn was a neighborhood of family and close friends. Everybody knew everybody else. It was a really great neighborhood to grow up in. I went to a private school, Visitation Academy, which was a little unusual, but as the oldest child, I was a little spoiled, and my mom sent me down there thinking that she was doing the right thing. I was sent in a limousine because there were no buses, and the school was about 1.5 miles from the house. So I would go in the limousine with probably 7 other girls and be brought to the school, picked up, and brought back home. I went there until 8th grade. As soon as I was able to, probably 2nd grade, I would walk the 1.5 miles over, to the school, and then the 1.5 miles back, never feeling at all nervous about walking through the neighborhoods. I went to Fort Hamilton High School, which is right down on Shore Road that you would pass if you're down on the highway in Brooklyn. And I went and got married right after high school at age 20. Came out to Long Island, worked for the phone company for about 2 years, and had my first child and stopped working and stayed home until my 4th child entered kindergarten. I was born in Bay Ridge Hospital in 1947 to Emily and Frank Merrill, the oldest of 3 daughters. My mother was Italian and German. My dad was Irish and Scotch. When I was married in 1968, I moved to Long Island. The street I grew up on has not changed as much as you would think. There are still families there that were there when I was a child. The house is just passed down from one generation to the other. My sister and her husband now live in the house we grew up in. If you go downtown to the area by the Brooklyn Bridge, it's changed dramatically. The factories are now $1 million condos. Brooklyn in general has become the place to live. The rents could now be higher than the rents of New York City. There are several people on the block that are still the same families that were there when I was a kid. The houses are just passed down from one generation to the other. Our house is the house that my dad actually was raised in. My father was born in 1918, and they bought the house in 1920, and it's been in our family ever since. My parents bought the house in 1946. And now my sister and her husband have purchased the house from my mother and father and live in it now. So it's stayed in the family since 1920.
This is 92nd Street on the corner of Gatling Place. Across the street was where my grandparents' house used to be. There's their apartment. And here, all of this used to be houses on the other side of Gatling Place. And this is looking up the street to Gatling. Little single-family house. It's the only single-family house on the block. The building next door used to be a single-family, but obviously they tore it down about 10 years ago and built condos, which is what they do a lot of times in Brooklyn now.
Brooklyn to me is my hometown. I am Brooklyn. You could hear it in my voice. You could see it on my face, really, I think. my memories of Brooklyn are all good memories. Sunday morning, when we went to church as a family and ran into half my family up there. Sunday afternoon was dinner at my grandmother's house. It's something that now in this generation, with everybody being so busy and running in so many different directions, is hard to do. I try every once in a while to do a Sunday dinner, which we call Gindaloon Sunday at my house with my kids and my grandkids, and we're all together. I try to do that and instill in them a family feeling that when no matter who's alive and who's dead, and I want everybody to always stay as part of one big family. I want all my kids to stay together. I want all my granddaughters to always be family and always do things together and maintain holidays together. It's what my memory of my childhood is, and it's a hope for that. I hope that they maintain and always have a family as part of their life. We had a summer home in Wyandanch, Long Island. It was a log cabin. It had an outhouse and a pump to get water. My grandmother, who worked for Poly Prep, which was a private school just several blocks from the house, would finish working. She was a cook right about the same time as we finished school, and we would spend the summer out on Long Island. It was just wonderful. I loved it out there, and we have wonderful memories from being at the cabin. My aunt and uncle bought a house right up the block. My other two aunts lived around the corner, so we had a very similar situation as we had in Brooklyn, with family all around. I was 20 when I was married and moved to Long Island. Most of my family followed me out. Most of my friends were married young. It was pretty common back then. I was a stay-at-home mom until my youngest child was in kindergarten. I met my husband in 1962. We started dating in 1963, and we were married in 1968. He had already started to work for the Long Island Lighting Company, and I was working for the telephone company and was able to transfer out. When we were married, we purchased a house in Lindenhurst, Long Island, in a month actually after we were married, and we still live in the same house after all these years. We raised our 4 kids there, and now have our grandchildren come and stay with us all in the same house. I was 20 when I got married. My girlfriends all were married, all in the same time frame as I was. We were all married and had children probably by our 21st and 22nd birthdays. It was really not unusual for someone to be married at that age. My neighborhood was divided by the Verazzano Bridge. Growing up on one side of the street was Irish, the other side Italian, and up on the corner was mainly Swedish. When the construction started, the whole west side of the street and several blocks after that were demolished and dug out for the Gowanus and Brooklyn-Queens Expressway entrance to the bridge. Over 7,000 people were displaced in Bay Ridge. Many of my friends moved from the neighborhood. Some were lucky enough to be able to find housing on Gatling Place and stay.
This is sitting on my stoop, looking across the street. That used to be houses back to back from Gatling Place to Dalgren, and all of these houses were taken to build the bridge.
Whenever I visit my sister, I feel like I'm going home. The biggest difference is that you walk everywhere. The house has no driveway and there's alternate side of the street parking. That would be kind of hard to get used to after living on Long Island. The biggest change is the different immigrants now living in the neighborhood. An area that had been primarily Irish and Italian are now Asian and Russian. It is still a very safe and friendly place to live. It was a wonderful neighborhood. My grandparents lived on the same block as my aunts, uncles, and cousins. In a 5-block radius, I had at least 10 relatives. When I first moved to Long Island, it was strange not having everyone around me. The biggest change is that you have to drive everywhere. I took a city bus to high school and walked about a mile and a half to grammar school. I took the subway to work in downtown Brooklyn. Starting a new job and having to drive every day after I moved to Long Island was very interesting. That's when I missed Brooklyn the most. My sister Ellen still lives in Brooklyn, never got her license, and walks everywhere. The only time I was ever nervous was on the subway. I was the last stop on the R train and was usually alone. The train would stop and the lights would go out. I still don't like the subway. Walking the neighborhood was always safe. There was always an Italian grandmother looking out the window. If you did anything wrong, the family would know before you even made it home. The question that you asked me about bad memories for Brooklyn is hard for me to answer. I am Brooklyn. I don't have bad memories. You know, I've been out of there for 49 years, and maybe I look back with rose-colored glasses, but my memories of Brooklyn are wonderful. I grew up in a great family and a great neighborhood and a lot of great memories. I have. I think the reason I have so many problems answering some of the questions that you asked me, like what were the bad areas and what was going on in other parts of Brooklyn, is because basically Gatling Place was my world and my family was there, and it really boils down to the fact that it's family that I remember about Brooklyn, and that's why I have such good memories of being brought up there. I had good family, good friends, and it was a very small world. At the time, Sunset Park was not the best area in Brooklyn, but now everything has changed. The area Emma is living in Lower Manhattan is very safe, and it's about living in a community of people where you feel safe. She's in an area of Chinatown that is very family oriented. My family was originally from an area of Little Italy, not far from where Emma is now. They were going to the suburbs when they moved to Brooklyn. I was in high school when the Verazzano Bridge opened. Because it was built on my corner and my father helped build it, I've always considered it mine. It will always have a special place in my heart. I was standing on the corner with my girlfriend when a boy from high school was in line to cross over. He was in about the 10th car and he told us to hop in. I was thrilled, and it was a beautiful sight. You could see the Statue of Liberty in the harbor. I still love to ride over the bridge. When we took a cruise several years ago and the ship went under the bridge, it was beautiful. Before, you had to take the Staten Island ferry to get from Brooklyn over to Staten Island. The bridge is beautiful. At the time in 1964, it was the longest suspension bridge in the world. At 4,260 feet, it's about 14 football fields. 12,000 people worked on it, and 3 men died. No one is buried in the foundation. That was just a line from Saturday Night Fever. It cost $320 million. By today's standards, that's not much, but back then it was a lot of money. He loved it. This was his neighborhood. When it was almost done, he would walk down the block to work. After it was done, they gave out medals for the men that built it, and I still have that. It did mean more traffic, and it was hard to get used to the noise of the parkway under our windows. It's also where the New York City Marathon comes over the bridge and onto 92nd Street, which is on our corner. The construction of the bridge took a tiny little neighborhood in Fort Hamilton and made it open to more people and cars. Growing up, it was very quiet with just the people that lived there. Downtown Brooklyn, down by the Brooklyn Bridge, it's an area now called Dumbo, is probably as expensive, if not more so, than certain areas of Manhattan, because Manhattan has gotten so crowded, and the area down by the Brooklyn Bridge has been revitalized, and it's beautiful. So people are choosing to live there, and Manhattan is just on the other side of the bridge. Some people walk across the bridge in the morning and they're in Lower Manhattan and can jump on the subway and go to work relatively fast. It's really a beautiful area. One of the pictures that you may see that I sent to Colleen is walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, showing when you're entering Brooklyn. It's really a special place, and everybody should try to do it at some point. What Ed Koch did was make the city more successful and not just a greeting place for immigrants. Many of the poor areas were pushed out whether they liked it or not. Fort Hamilton was the hub for all the soldiers in the area. My grandfather worked at the fort, so we were able to go there whenever we wanted. Many of the kids I went to school with at Fort Hamilton High School were Army kids. It was hard to lose friends when their families were transferred. I think in today's economy, the city is not the sleepy little neighborhoods that they once were. Everyone is working. The stay-at-home mom is very rare. Kids are in daycare and after-school programs. When I was a kid, even though both my mother and my grandmother worked, which was unusual for the time, we always had a family member or someone from the neighborhood watching us. It may have been positive for the financial improvement of the neighborhoods, but it was very hard on many poor immigrant families that didn't speak English and were forced out. When Rudy Giuliani became mayor, he made significant changes, and I feel cleaned up many areas in Manhattan that were dangerous. Times Square was drug-ridden. He made it into a tourist destination. It had brought billions of dollars into the city. The other side of that is that, again, the people were outpriced in their neighborhoods. The bank that my mother worked in would give us tickets for Broadway. I guess I was around 10, 12 when my mother and father first started taking me in to see the plays. I got to see Tony Perkins, who you wouldn't recognize, but he was the son from Psycho. It was exciting to see somebody that you knew who he was on the stage in Broadway. The tickets at that point were $8 in comparison to, $150 that they are now. The neighborhood itself, you had to be careful because Times Square was not cleaned up yet in the 50s and 60s. There were a lot of vagrants and drugs, and Times Square itself was really a dangerous place. Even back then, it was not the place you wanted to be. When Giuliani came in and cleaned it up, you go to Times Square now, and it's a tourist destination. I mean, it's beautiful. My husband and I were just in there recently seeing A Bronx Tale, which is a story similar to the story that I've been telling about a young boy growing up in the Bronx in the late 50s, early 60s. And it was really a great play. We stayed in the city, and you can walk around and feel safe, and there's so many things that you could do. We went down to the World Trade Center, to Freedom Tower, and when you stand at the window looking out over the harbor, you're looking out at the Statue of Liberty and the Verazzano Bridge, which leads right to the house that I grew up in. And it's amazing to look out over the Narrows and see it from, that direction. It was amazing, and you should try to do it if you get a chance.
So in 1984, I worked for a law firm in downtown Manhattan in Wall Street, and they decided to move to Midtown, 6th Avenue and 44th Street, 2 blocks away from Bryant Park. And the week we moved up to Midtown, everyone was called into a big conference room up on the 40th floor and told not to walk past Bryant Park in the evening. You could do it during the day, but stay on the far side of the street. It was a crack haven, I guess. There were drug sales, there was gunshots, there was all sorts of crazy stuff. And this is at 42nd and 6th Avenue in New York City. Jump ahead 20 years, and this is where Fashion Week, up until a few years ago, was held. Bryant Park is now this beautiful park. They've got kiosks set up. They have an ice rink in the winter. They had Fashion Week there for the last 10 or 15 years. And in my opinion, all due to the work of Rudy Giuliani, who came in and really cleaned up the city and made it a destination for tourists and a safe environment for the people working in the city.
You asked me about Mayor de Blasio. I don't particularly care for him. I felt that his agenda was to go in and undo just about everything that Michael Bloomberg did while he was mayor. One of the things that he did that really upset me was he spoke at a press conference saying that he felt that his biracial son would not be safe walking in the city because of the police. as a child of Brooklyn whose family was in the police department probably 4 generations in a row, I just felt that he's looking at one side of a story and not looking at the whole picture. My grandmother worked in the factories in downtown Brooklyn during the war because so many young men were gone from the neighborhood that they hired women to fill in the factory slots while the men were gone. And she went on to become the cook at a private school after the men came back and kind of pushed the women out of the jobs. When I was growing up, the civil rights movement really didn't impact us. There were some black kids in my school. There were kids that came in through the army. One of my friends was a young black girl whose father was sent to Fort Hamilton after being in Germany. I found it very interesting talking to these people because they've traveled all over the world, some of them, and I had been on Gatling Place. It was not a time of social unrest at that point. As far as the gays in the community, one of the little boys up the block, which I think at this point in time would probably be called transgender, preferred to play with the girls and be one of the little girls. Nobody ever really said anything. His brother would have beat anybody up if they did say anything about him, and we just watched out for him and took care of him, and it was never made an issue. I was thinking about a story that my dad told us when you were asking me about how the gays were treated in the 50s and the 60s. One of the stories that my father always told about when he was in the Merchant Marines, which was in the late 1940s, one of his shipmates was a gay man, and he went into port when they had docked, and somebody in a bar beat him up. And the men on the ship retaliated by going down to the bar and trashing the bar. And this was considered standing up for a shipmate. And my dad's answer was that, unfortunately, he was a woman in a man's body, and it wasn't his fault.
So I guess the question is about gay rights. I can give you my history of working at a law firm in New York City. I started there in 1997, and at the time it was known as a gay-friendly firm. And what that meant, and I spoke to, there were partners, associates, secretaries. My boss, who was the executive director, was a lesbian. And when I spoke to one of the secretaries one day about, how did they all kind of come to know that this was a gay-friendly firm, she kind of smiled at me and said, the internet. So back in the day when a lot of people came from out of town. I know a lot of the secretaries were not born in New York. They were born out in, say, in the Midwest, and they'd moved to New York because they knew that it was a gay-friendly environment versus their hometown where they could conceivably embarrass their parents or whatever the case is. So how it developed is that this firm had a couple of gay partners, and therefore it became a gay-friendly firm where people just through the internet learned that that's what type of firm it was. Everyone was accepted. It was a wonderful environment. They all worked hard. They lived their life. Now, I think 2017, it's different because with Ellen DeGeneres and Rosie O'Donnell and everyone else, the whole community has changed where if you're gay today, you're considered part of the mainstream and you could go for a job anywhere, pretty much. I'm sure there's still restrictions or still narrow-minded people, but in general, It's a very different environment back in that 20-year span.